Facebook has declared war on traditional banking. Their new digital currency, Libra, which was announced this summer, is supposed to make payments, saving and money transferring very easy, especially for the 1.7 billion people across the globe who do not have a bank account at the moment. With Payal Arora, professor in technology, values and digital media cultures, I will discuss what Facebook is getting into and whether another cryptocurrency is really going to solve anything. But first, before we start talking, let's have a look at the campaign Facebook started.
Remember when these were fast? And these? Technology has improved the world around us. So why is it simple to send one of these anywhere in an instant, but not money?
Bartering to shell, to gold, to money.
What if we made money truly global, stable, and secure? What if everyone was invited to the global economy with access to the same financial opportunities? Introducing Libra, a new global currency.
Payal, you're a digital anthropologist. You have written a book about how technology or especially about people all across the world relate to technology. What did you first think when you heard Facebook was launching a cryptocurrency?
I was thinking it's time Facebook rescued us. You know, Facebook is, of course, the hero of the world. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously not. I mean, you know, I just found it extraordinarily arrogant because when we think about banking, we think about trust. It is a trust economy. And Facebook, which has lost so much credibility in the last few years, has the arrogance to say that, listen, I'm going to be at the forefront of building trust. And you can trust me because I've proven it, you know. So I thought it was extraordinarily arrogant, but also it was interesting that so many banking institutions back them, right? Because this is not just floating Facebook's initiative. The reason they were able to do this is because they have a host of conventional banking institutions saying, we will vouch for you.
Like,
and
for
this
example,
is something,
Visa, MasterCard.
Absolutely, across board, including Spotify, Uber. So it's, and which also says something, right? Because it's not just about banking. And this says the era we are in is that banking industry is radically transforming. Because it's not that they are endorsing them. They are holding on to Facebook to get a renewal because they are becoming, in some sense, redundant based on their current institutional design.
Could you, before we get deeper into it, could you explain what Libra is and why it's so radically different from traditional banking?
Okay, so firstly, it's not radical. There are a lot more radical ways in which money is moving across the world. But what it is basically not a currency. So that's basically, you know, a lot of the articles out there is it's currency. It's not. It's not replacing a current currency. It's basically a payment method. It's a novel way in which you can move money from one point to another using its current digital infrastructures. So it's a channel for currency, right? And that is what Libra is. And because it is pegged to actual currency. And so it is, in a sense, it appears novel, but it's very conventional. It's not even decentralized. It's hyper-centralized at the Swiss institution.
So you're saying it's about money transfer, so it's basically sort of a digital Western Union.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot more. If we are really talking about novelty, we need to ask about how our current banking structures, which are the reasons why 1.7 billion people are unbanked. Because when we think about the unbanked, we think about, geez, these people are not participating in the financial economy. When that's not true. They're not participating in the banking system. Because here's another fact. There's 500 billion in remittances that traveled, right? 500 billion in remittances that traveled from, to low-income countries. right?
This is somebody who works in the US and sends money to Mexico, for example.
Exactly, because we have, see, the low-income populations, they are traveling, like Filipino nurses go to Canada, and then they are away from their families for almost a year. They send money back to their children. Bangladeshi construction workers go to Abu Dhabi. Their passports are taken away, and then they are there for extended periods of time, sending back remittances. Entire countries outside the West are being supported substantively by these remittances. Mm-hmm. So it's not that Facebook is bringing the unbanked into the financial system. What they're doing is they are pulling them into a data mining entity which can actually entrap them through these kind of corporate structures.
But they are also solving a problem, right? Because money transferring in the common way as it is done now is very expensive.
Absolutely, yes. It is very expensive. And so, for example, you pay on average 11% interest rate. So a poor person who has to send their meager savings to their families gives about 11%. Mm-hmm. But this is based on a banking infrastructure. And what is missing with Libra is they are very scarce with detail. What is the interest? What is the incentive plan behind it as money is moving from one point to another? Mm-hmm. How are regulations going to be instituted, particularly in this data hacking climate? If it's too big to fail, what's going to happen, right?
There's a lot of reason to be cynical about it. And lots of people instantly did when it was announced this June. But let's be a little bit, maybe you would call it naive or optimistic. I quote, what if we made money truly global, stable, and secure? What if everyone was invited to the global economy? That's a good thing to strive for, right?
Right. So a number of things are problematic here. One is security. Facebook is not really gaining a reputation on security. So already they've had so many data hacking episodes. And so when this ties in with financials, who is going, the consequences are astronomical, right? And it is the taxpayers are going to be bailing out Facebook, right? Then in terms of global, indeed, you're right. It's like more than 2 billion of the world's users have Facebook. But things are changing radically. What's going on in the world, right? China is a decade ahead in fintech with, like I just came back from Macau and I went to a restaurant and, it's just a regular restaurant, nothing fancy. And I took out cash. I couldn't pay because it said on each table, WeChat pay only, right? You just take
WeChat is sort of a WhatsApp, but you can...
It's the equivalent of the Chinese WhatsApp, but it's not just WhatsApp, right? The reason why Chinese applications are so way in advance is because it's an ecosystem of applications. You can game, you can pay your bus ticket, you can watch movies, you can bank, you can date, you can do all this in one system. Mm-hmm. So it's a hyper-convergence of multiple features. So people are very entrenched. And there's fierce competition within China. Already, firstly, they're a decade ahead. And then you have WeChat competing with Alipay and then a whole host of new services, right? Mm-hmm. So when Facebook's not even allowed there. So we're talking about already that's not global because China's out of the equation. Then you'll say, hey, but at least India is there, right? That's another 1.2 billion people. Well, not really, because GeoPay has launched. And what is Geo? It's a telecom initiative by one of the richest men in the world, Mukesh Ambani, and backed by this massive, company called Reliance. And they have made data the cheapest in the world. They are the biggest data network in the world. And what is their business strategy after investing $40 billion? Is, they have launched GeoPay. And the government, of course, whether it's India, China, are getting very nationalistic. And they're like, we will back Geo in India. China will back Alipay, WeChat. And so tell me, how is Facebook going to carve?
Don't stand a chance, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that they are really underestimating the local competition, which is not local anymore. India and China are fiercely competing to export their ecosystems to many African countries, Latin American countries, East Asia, right? So the idea that Facebook, which is decade behind and is entering with a few little apps converged together, like WeChat, Instagram, doesn't stand a chance.
And wouldn't it be, because this is the reality you were saying, but wouldn't it be good if Facebook was allowed to enter, for example, the Chinese market, where the social credit score is taking more and more dominant place in building trust in relation to financial transactions as well? Wouldn't it be good if money were to be truly global with a partner like Facebook?
Firstly, money will never be truly global. And that much, basically, there's a two-tier global experience. Basically, the very wealthy will experience a global economy, including, so they can seamlessly move, with the best passports, their bank accounts in Switzerland, Panama, and the Cayman Islands, right? They are able to seamlessly move across board. And then there's the rest of us, right, who are very entrenched in, our national legal systems, our tax-paying systems, and however much we'd like finance to move globally, there is a need for national regulation. And guess what? Even though Facebook is saying it's global, guess what? What happened right after? Its own US regulators and the Congress said, we're going to freeze your movement until we look at it closely, because they were pissed. They were like, why didn't you run it by us? I mean, you think you are a country in itself. I'm sorry, you're not. You are based in the US. You have to abide by United States laws. And so what has the Congress done? They've put a temporary freeze on Libra. What has France and Germany just done today and yesterday? Mm-hmm. They've said, over our dead body, you're entering European soil. European soil. We are in a climate, finance and nationalism is very deeply tied. So let's not make any mistake about that, is that Facebook cannot get global in the way it's, stating.
I announced it as a cryptocurrency, which is what Bitcoin, for example, is, what Ripple is, what Ethereum is. But you wrote an article in NRC this summer where you were not really mentioning these cryptocurrencies as competitors, but more talking about the social credit score in China. And you were also really what struck me, quite positive about this rating system they have going on in China. Could you say something about that?
So, obviously there's a tremendous danger in, like social credit scores being used in the wrong way, just like a lot of systems that get innovated, right?
Because the idea I have is that when you don't help your old neighbor crossing the street, you won't be able to buy a bus ticket the next week because your social credit score is going down. Somebody noticed.
So look, it comes down to, I know it seems so. If you Google social credit score China, you pretty much like see Orwellian sort of narratives, right? Oh my, exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, do we really want to become that? But what is unfair here is to not acknowledge that what the social credit score really was intended for is because the banking system refused to enable a lot of the poor people to get a bank account because, one, they didn't have assets. So what do you do when you're a communist or well, in many ways, China is not a communist country. It's a post-communist, right? It's a communist, capitalistic country. It's a new breed, right? But what do you do when you have a communist legacy, so people don't have any assets, right? How do you encourage banks to loan to them? So they were refusing to loan. So what did China do? It is about trust, right? And banks want some kind of signal of trust, that I can trust to give you this loan. So it created this social credit score, so you could manage your reputation, and low-income people could say, hey, listen, I'm a good citizen. I did this right and did this right. And they build currency and reputation, which enabled them to get access to small loans. And what that did is that it brought out the biggest number of poor people out of poverty in the history of the world. Like, in the shortest period of time, we had millions of people coming out of poverty.
So this is a way better way of helping these people. It was, it's 1.7 billion.
That is innovation. Because basically they were stuck. They're like, how do I come up with And firstly, a lot of them also don't have passports or any form of identification. We don't know what their history is of, banking. Often they're not. A lot of it is in the informal economy or black economy. How do you put them into the fold? Because what they're competing with is a black economy. How are all these remittances moving, right? It's an informal economy, 500 billion, not to forget, right? So China that was a brilliant creative way in saying...
There are some objections possible, right?
Yeah, of course. The ones you brought up is that what happens when you abuse a system and start to track people or oppress it. But we have to look at how the Chinese citizens are responding. Because there's surveys done on how they're relatively happy with it. Because, look, they know they are being watched, right? But what they also see is that at last they have an opportunity to make their way into a system where before they didn't have any chance. So there's a matter of choice, that they're able to game the system in some way. It gives them a little bit of agency, right? So it's always in relation to what are the alternatives.
Yeah.
And the alternatives based on the banking systems, the traditional banking systems, who continue to fail us time and again due to their absolute lack of imagination and their absolute oligarchies in the system. Basically they have had very little incentive to change, right? Look at the Wall Street crisis. What happened right after? They got the biggest bonuses right after that, right? So I'm afraid that, it's a combination of we have currently a toxic banking culture that needs to change, poor incentivization, and a lot of innovation happening outside the West, which is deeply undermined. And I do believe that Americans are actually, because they are fearful of China, because, of course, the only other contender to Silicon Valley has been the Chinese, economy, digital economy. They've had the most number of, Huawei has become the biggest telecom, and look at how the US is reacting to competition. They're threatened. And so, this is, I think this is something which we have to learn, is there needs to be a humbling about the outreach of Facebook, its, impact on the so-called global world, right?
Last question, why, to get back to Libra, why are we so fond of the idea that technology coming from Silicon Valley can save the world in one way or another?
Well, I think, we have to put the two separate. People actually, when we talk about technology, the climate, I feel, in Europe and basically in Western countries that are wealthier and are used to good, stable institutions, are extraordinarily negative and pessimistic about what technology is doing. So you see headlines like, it's destroying our democracy, it's destroying our culture or the youth, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you go outside, you talk to people in Bangladesh or India and China, they're extraordinarily optimistic because it has at last provided a new form of governance, some kind of checks and balances in countries which, have often are very weak infrastructures, weak institutions, non-existing laws to protect them. And so it gives them some kind of alternatives. So we need to put that really in place, is that this is an alternative, it's expanding choice, whether we like it or not.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.